All right, welcome everyone. I'm Dan McKiernan, the Director of the Division of Marine Fisheries and the Chairman of this Shellfish Advisory Panel. I have some opening remarks and then we're going to take some attendance. The first thing I would like to do is I would ask all of the attendees to go into the chat and record your name and affiliation. I understand one of the weaknesses of these Zoom calls is folks from the outside can't always see all of the members. If you're not a panelist, that's one of the weaknesses. But I've found that in many of the Zoom meetings that I've attended, by doing this, it gives folks an opportunity to see who's on the meeting, as well as creating kind of a record of attendees. So if you could just go into the chat and give us your name and your affiliation at this time. Next, I want to just remind everyone, why this panel was created, and it was to enhance multi-way communication. And what I mean by that is, obviously DMF and its stakeholders, but there's so many other agencies that have a role in shellfish management. And I am about to be signed out. No, I'm going to keep going. I've got 10 minutes and then my computer's going to shut down. So I'm going to continue. Anyway, just want to remind everybody, again, we have 6 government agencies here. We have, DEP, we have DAR, we have CZM, DMF, we have the Food Protection Program at DPH. And it's just so valuable to be able to keep open lines of communication, and not to mention the fact that we have stakeholders who would like to get information from all of us in the government, as well as representatives of the legislature. And then, of course, the stakeholders, folks who are recreational or commercial interests are from the municipality. This is a great opportunity for you to create connections, not only with the government agencies, but also with the other members of the panel. Because this is a legislative created body, the meetings are subject to the open meeting law, and all meeting minutes are going to be posted, and all written materials are going to be posted as well to the DMF website. So a successful meeting for me, and I think you'd agree, is we will try to accomplish all of those initiatives at past meetings that we've defined as important to resolve or to investigate, to have clear and open communication, not only among the stakeholders, but among the agencies as well, to provide to stakeholders a venue to raise concerns, especially on emerging issues, and to have enhanced dialogue in this open forum and build relationships so we can all reach out to one another outside of this meeting and do what needs to be done for shellfish management. So at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take attendance. And so I'm going to go down the list. I'm going to name the member, and if there's if someone here is here representing them, especially in the agency side, just let us know. Is Jim Abbott with us? All right, Ron Bergstrom. Just
here.
Okay, thanks. Bob Colby. Bob's not here. Amy Ann Croto.
Here.
Mike DeVasto.
Here.
Great. Bill Doyle.
Here.
Renee Gagne.
Here.
Seth Garfield. No Seth today. Alex Hay.
Present.
Steve Kirk.
I'm here.
Dale Levitt.
I'm here.
Josh Ritzmer.
Here.
Alan Rencarell. No, Alan. Mike Trupiano. And then on the agency side, Department of Ag Resources, I think I saw Sean.
Here.
Yep, great. DEP, Lisa Rhodes is here.
Here. Yep.
CZM, I see Todd Callahan sitting in
Yes,
for
here.
Lisa.
Thank you.
And then Public Health's Food Protection Program. Is Eric Hickey with us?
Present.
Great, thanks. Commission on Indian Affairs, Jim Peters.
Good morning.
Great, thanks, Jim. And then is there anyone here from the House or Senate chairs of the Joint Committee on Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture?
Yes, good morning. Shannon Emmett here on behalf of Rep. Cahill, House Chair.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Okay. At this point, we need to review the meeting agenda. Is there any requested changes to the agenda? Raise your hand.
Not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. And then review and approval of the minutes of the last meeting on November 15th.
So Dan, for this, if there's any edits, we'll have to, first we need a motion to adopt. If there are any edits, we can amend that motion, and then we're gonna need a roll call vote to approve.
Okay.
Motion to adopt the minutes, Todd Callahan.
Seconded, Dale Levitt.
Are there any
Go ahead,
edits
Jared.
to the minutes? Use the hand raise function if there are. Amy Croto?
Yeah, I just noticed under the report on bulk tagging subcommittee, there was, and I wasn't in attendance at either meeting, unfortunately, I was out of state, but in the first paragraph, it says it was held November 9th, and then in the second paragraph, it says November 8th.
Okay, we can correct that. That should be easy to correct in the final version. Is there a motion? Any other edits?
I don't have any.
Can we have a motion to adopt the minutes as amended?
So moved, Dale Levitt.
A second?
Second, Todd Callahan.
All right, we can move that to a roll call vote.
Julia, why don't you take the roll call? And Jared, I'm going to sign off because my computer's about to shut down. I'm going to come right back.
Okay.
It's a forced shutdown. And Jared, could we go to, if I'm not back, could we go to ISSC if you don't see me back on the screen? We'll move the agenda to number 3
Okay.
if I don't make it back instantaneously. Thanks.
All right, so I'll call the roll here. Todd Callaghan,
Yes, aye.
Alex Hy,
Aye.
Bill Doyle,
Aye.
Jim Peters,
Aye.
Mike DeVasta,
Abstain.
Renee Gagne,
Accept.
Sean Bowen,
Aye.
Steve Kirk, Aye. Dale Levitt,
Aye.
Amy Croto,
Abstain.
Eric Hickey,
Aye.
Josh Rietsma,
Aye.
Lisa Rhodes,
Aye.
Ron Bergstrom, Aye. Shannon Emmett,
Aye.
Steve Kirk.
You called me. I'll say
Oh,
aye again.
all right. Sean Bowen, did I get you as well?
Yes, I'm on twice. Yes.
All right, so that's approved unanimously. So moving on from that with the chair, we're going to move to the ISSC biennial meeting proposals, and that will be handled by Jeff Kennedy.
Thanks, Jared. Good morning.
Jeff, you should be able to share your presentation.
All right, thank you. Good morning. It's early in the morning and you've just started off this meeting, and yet I am going to put you back to sleep. This is you've seen some of these slides before, some of this presentation before, but it is ISSC is a complex organization and a complex process. So I'm going to do a bunch of slides just setting the table, and then we'll get into proposals. There are 110 total proposals to be discussed at this meeting. 90 of them are new. So there's a lot of discussion to go on. There's a lot of minutia, and it's probably it's not fun when you're just a shellfish biologist. But it is necessary. It's regulatory and little minor edits and changes to the language of a proposal or to the model ordinance can have significant impacts on how we operate. Not just EMF and not just DPH and MEP, but also the industry and how you growers and wild harvesters react, the industry, the seafood dealers. So we're not going to get into the fine details of every proposal. We don't have that kind of time. But I've selected some proposals to draw your attention to, and we'll go through it. And I think we have about 45 minutes, so I think we should have 5 or 10 minutes at the end to discuss if there are any questions or for discussion. The goal of the NSSP, you've seen this before, and you know it because you participated in all these groups, MSI, the SAP, and MSOA, but it is our nexus where we interact, and the NSSP, the National Shellfish Sanitation Program Guide, is our Bible. The purpose of the ISSC, the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference, it provides the structure for regulatory authorities and industry and the feds for regulatory guidelines and procedures ensuring an equal and uniform application of the NSSP. The participants at the ISSC, and that meeting is coming up on the 18th through the 23rd, is state regulatory officials, both producing states, the coastal, and some non-producing inland states. In addition to that, there's FDA and other federal agencies who are participants in the conference. It's called the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference, but I should say that's it. When you say that to people, conference, you use that word, people think, oh, it could be a webinar, it could be you're just sitting and listening to talks, and nothing could be further from the truth. It's a Congress. This is where we make the rules. So it's an intense week where we go through these proposals, and fortunately we have industry involved as well as foreign governments who want to ship into the US. They need to adhere to all the NSSP requirements. So they're often here at the conference. This conference in 2 weeks is down in Baton Rouge. ISSC, there were previous to the actual establishment of the ISSC in 1980. The NSSP was published by the US Food and Drug Administration, and there were manuals in 1965, 86, and 87. There have been a number of revisions between 86 and 95. And then finally, the model ordinance was published in 99. That was the first year. The NSSP comprises the model ordinance, public health explanations, guidance documents, and checklists and other background information. So it's a 500-page document. If ever you want to get to sleep at night, pick it up. So the Guide for Control of Mollusk and Shellfish has been published all these years, every other year in recent years. The conference is a biennial now meeting, not every year as it started out. When you go to the ISSC website, there are a number of previous revisions of the guide you can look up. The most recent is 2019. So the organization of the ISSC, there's constitution, bylaws, and procedures, and you can look those up going to the ISSC website, issc.org, and those lay out the procedures We operate by Robert's rules. Everything is Robert's rules. There's an executive director who manages a staff. The executive board has 18 members, a combination of regulatory, industry, and FDA. They elect a board chair. There's also an executive committee that really manages the executive office. Then there's a task force. The task force, there are 3 different task force. Each task force is made up of 9 members, 8 voting members, and a chair. The first task force 1 is growing area patrol, and lab is also thrown in there. So that this year has the most number of proposals. I think there are 58 that they have to review. 18 or 20 are lab. Task force 2 is harvesting, handling, and distribution. Think plant sanitation primarily. And then task force 3 is administrative. There are also committees, both standing committees and ad hoc committees that are created as needed. And there's the General Assembly, which are all composed of the voting delegates, and those are all state regulators. So typically at the conference, so proposals have been submitted to the conference, and they've been assigned a task force 1, 2, or 3. They will at the conference, new proposals will go to the task force first, and the task force will decide whether or not the proponent will do a presentation, and the task force members will interrogate that presenter for information on their proposal and why it's important. It's kind of like a Supreme Court. You have the task force members who are up front of the room, and they ask questions, and then they decide whether or not this particular proposal should be sent with a recommendation onto the General Assembly, or whether the recommendation is it should be sent to a committee for discussion. That means if they decide that this proposal needs to go to committee, it will be go to committee at the next conference. So no action would be taken on it at that meeting. So with these new proposals that have been submitted, if a task force decides that there's enough question or concern, or that it needs to be worked out further, they're going to make a recommendation to the General Assembly that the proposal get moved to committee. Otherwise, it could be voted on by General Assembly on the last day of the conference. So we open up the week with a General Assembly, and then we jump right in the next day to committee meetings. So committee meetings generally work for 2 days, the first 2 days, and then we start the task force. So the first day of committees is generally dealing with proposals left over from previous conferences. So a task force can recommend to the conference, they either approve it, take no action, you can modify it. The task force can actually modify the language or the content of that proposal, or they can make a recommendation to send the proposal to committee. That's pretty important to understand exactly what the task force has for power. Committees send recommendations on referred proposals back to the task force from usually from a previous year. So proposals that are from 2019 or 2017 or 2015 are being worked on currently, and will be worked on first 2 days of the committee. And then those recommendations will be sent to the task force, either 1, 2, or 3. And task force will then decide, gee, do they like language? Is there any reason to send it back to committee? Is there enough question? And that does happen. There are some proposals that have been, and you'll see, there are some proposals that have been around for since 2011. So the process can be slow at times. General Assembly on the last day votes, yes, no, but they cannot modify the proposal. Then after the conference, it goes to FDA. They can concur or not within 90 days on each proposal. And then the executive board may act or deliberate with the FDA on the contents of that that particular proposals. Actions, any new proposals, those become effective with the next revision, the next publishing of the NSSP. So that could be 6 months, it could be over a year. And generally those requirements, those new requirements don't become effective until the NSSP, the new NSSP has been updated and published. Unless, of course, the executive board stipulates an earlier date. So this is a look at the general idea, the general agenda for the week. It is much more complex and busy than this, because when you get to the conference, there'll be boards out front of all the meeting rooms, and they will list exactly which committees are meeting in which rooms. And so what committees can be meeting is that they're operating simultaneously, and you may want to be in a growing area committee meeting, and yet the biotoxin is meeting today, and there's also shellfish restoration, there could be plant sanitation. There are a lot of committees, and it's it's important to have a lot of people going. That's why we have 4 people going this year from DMF, plus Eric Hickey from DPH is going. It's important to have more people, because then you can take in more and exactly understand what's happening in these other committee meetings. So Sunday, it starts right off with committee meetings, Monday also, and then the task force start Monday after lunch. They go for Monday afternoon and then all day Tuesday generally. Then Wednesday, it's we have to, those task force reports will be published overnight, and they should be ready by noon, by midday on Wednesday. And after listening to a symposium early in the morning, you get to go back to your rooms and read the reports and try to understand exactly what was decided upon and recommended by the task force, so that you can discuss it at the closing General Assembly. And General Assembly happens Thursday morning, and it usually wraps by noon. And then there's an executive board meeting in the afternoon to recap the week. So this just gives you an idea of the number of proposals and what they look like. You can go onto the ISSC website and download the different documents, but Task Force 1 has the most number. You can see it's 58 hour. It's pretty busy. Let me go back and point out the top here. There are proposals from 2013. Proposal 107 is by Bob Rowe. It's a proposal on sources of seed for aquaculture. And you can see there are proposals from 2015 as well as 2017 that are still working their way through the process. A lot of 19, and then you get down to at the bottom of the second page on the right there is the new proposals 23-100. Task Force 2 has a little bit fewer, which is nice. They still have some left over from 15, 17, and 19. And Task Force 3 is administration, and fewer still, but there's an important one here that Eric and I are co-submitters. So jumping into the Task Force 1 proposals, just quickly, 17-100 is still being debated in committee, but that's really that was something Mike and I submitted back in 2017, and it was a very subtle, very small change to the definition of what a marina was. And that's really what started the mooring area proposal section. So that went to a committee, and they decided, well, we need to create a mooring area section in the model ordinance. So it's once you submit your proposal, it becomes the property of the conference. And so you never really know when you're opening, you could be opening a can of worms. So a simple 3 or 4 word change to a definition created a whole new section of the model ordinance. 19-101 is it creates it was submitted by Diane, Mike, and I, back in 19, it would create a new lab status, conditionally conforming. And that's went to the lab committee, but I don't believe there's been a lot of movement on that.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
this is Alex. What's the backstory on 19101?
Well, there are different ways to, there are different status for a lab that when FDA evaluates you, you either have a conforming lab or a non-conforming lab. And Diane wanted to, felt like there's a middle ground there. You need to have some kind of, when you've done the work, you're still a regulatory lab, you should be given a status of conditionally conforming, which means you're on the path to conforming. It's stigmatizing to be a non-conforming lab, even if you're working on procedures to become conforming. So it's both for existing labs that are taking on new procedures and new laboratory tests, or if you're just a new lab. It's nice. It really, this conditionally conforming is a middle ground. But my understanding is it really has not been debated at length in committee. So I'll be interested to see where that goes.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, 19108, reducing the minimum seed, minimum time seed is grown in a prohibited area for relays from 120 days down to 60 days. And it adds a stipulation when the water temps are above 50 degrees. This would have big impacts on our relay program. I'm sure Matt Camisa is very interested in this one. If this was to happen, we would not need to leave Shellfish closed for 120 days, 2 months. It could be down to 60 days. And so you could reopen relay areas sooner. So I'm not sure where that's at, but committees have been discussing it. And that'll be an interesting and helpful. It could be very beneficial to Massachusetts. 123 and 124, I'm on the biotoxin committee, and we've been working on these two documents. They were submitted by Alaska, and it's a complete rewrite of the public health explanations and the guidance document for biotoxin control. So these are still a work in progress. And there will be a corollary that's been submitted, corollary proposal that's been submitted by the executive office, ISSC executive office, that will actually put some of the new language that we've developed in these new documents in 123 and 124 as a new proposal. It'll be inserted as new requirements in the model ordinance, and that will be taken up by the Task Force 3. 19144, assessing wastewater treatment plant viral impact on growing areas using MSC. This was submitted by Tom Howell at Spinney Creek, and this has huge impacts to how what we're the work we're engaged in with the wastewater treatment plants and the overlap we have with our modeling with Dr. Chen at SMAST. So I'll be very interested to see what the committee has come up with as far as tweaking how we should use, or if we should use wastewater MSC as an indicator or an impact on growing areas to gauge that impact on growing areas. So this is huge, and it definitely will impact a lot of our areas. 19145, established guidance for shellfish cleansing studies. I'm also on the cleansing studies committee. That hasn't gone anywhere. We've had a number of meetings. It's a little bit frustrating, but there are requirements that for areas that currently in the model ordinance, in areas that are impacted by point sources and human sewerage, that there be shellfish cleansing studies conducted by the authorities. And so we were looking for guidance, exactly what constitutes a shellfish cleansing study? How many samples are enough? So that's still being worked on, and I'm sure we'll continue working on it at the conference on Sunday and Monday. Mooring area redefinition, that also was, it's a new proposal. I'm a co-submitter with Maine and Rhode Island. We're just talking about changing the definition or being more explicit in the definition of a mooring area, that it is more than 20 boats with MSDs. So we don't have to count boats that don't have, small boats that don't have MSDs. So it's a very simple proposal. Doesn't mean it will get accepted but it definitely will be generate discussion, I'm sure. 23-102, it defines and redefines and clarifies what seed is from prohibited area. It adds that seed from prohibited areas can be used for enhancement projects. It doesn't currently say that in the definition. 104 is a time frame for action to close a growing area due to VP illnesses. It's to reduce it from 60 to 30 days. That I don't have a lot of data on or information on, so I'll be interested to hear the submission on that. I hope I can hear that submission by the submitter. 23-108, clarify only if only MSC can be used to reduce a reopening a growing area in less than 21 days. Currently, I believe the language in the model ordinance says pathogen levels. It doesn't specifically say MSC, and this proposal wants to clarify that only MSC can be used to reopen a growing area sooner than 21 days. I think the language says MSC can be used to reopen an area and can be sampled after 7 days and before 21. And if you have good counts, low counts, 50 or below, you could reopen the area. But that language, pathogens, I think they're trying to remove that and substitute MSC for pathogens. 23-109 massages the model ordinance section on growing area reopening criteria. It's generally a pretty, by my read, it seems like a pretty good rewording, and this was submitted by FDA. 23-110 adds a restricted classification as an option for a marina area. Currently, the language in the model ordinance says a marina can be classified as conditionally approved, conditionally restricted, prohibited. Well, this adds restricted to that list. It seems like it really was an oversight when it went into the when it was adopted into the model ordinance. 23-111, it reduces the minimum closure for a relay product from 60 to 14 days, if only impacted by microbial contaminants. Well, certainly there's in Massachusetts, our relays from the Taunton River would not be strictly limited to microbial. It would be probably poisonous and deleterious substances as well. So it may not apply to us, but this is important, and you never know how these proposals will get changed and modified. So we have to pay attention to this one. 112 replaces the current language in the model ordinance that talks about sewage and bodily fluids, and they're replacing that language with sewage and vomitus. As a former chair of the sewage and bodily fluids subcommittee at the last conference, this is near and dear to my heart. Certainly the concern here is that requirements that no sewage or bodily fluids and bodily fluids cannot be discharged. That was a broad definition. That was too broad. Bodily fluids was just too broad. So I believe this was submitted by Maine and Washington, or maybe it was Maine and California. And they're hoping to limit that the bodily fluids down to just vomitus. So that's an important distinction. You wouldn't want, I'm sure any grower or harvester would not want to be written up for sweat or maybe just spitting into the water, when really the concern is vomit, sewage and vomit. Yeah, that's what we talk about at these conferences. 23-121 is submitted by me and Maine and Rhode Island. It's a request for mooring area guidance document. And you can see 23-124 by FDA is actually new marina and mooring area guidance document. So that's definitely, those two need to be paired together, and we need to work on reviewing what they've proposed. A quick look, it doesn't look terrible, but we definitely need to get more input from other states and other industries. 23-123 clarifies how the P90 is calculated for depurated end product. Again, if you really want to fall asleep, pull that one up and you'll cry. Task Force 2, select Task Force 2 proposals. I'm going to ask Eric Hickey if he's willing to talk about some select Task Force 2 proposals. Eric, and Eric, I should say that Eric is the Region 1 regulatory representative on the executive board. So Eric is our link to under the tent. He is in the tent. The rest of us are not in the room, but he is. And so Eric has great insight on all actions at the conference, and I really rely on Eric and his assessment of the process and all these proposals as well, because he has great experience. So Eric, are you on?
Yes, I am, Jeff, and thank you for those kind words. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So, as Jeff said, I sit on the executive board, but in addition to that, I do some of the meat and potatoes work at the conference as I chair a couple of committees and a member of several additional committees. So there are a lot of proposals, as Jeff said, and we don't have a whole lot of time to go through every one of them. So what I did is I selected a few proposals that relate to some of the committees I chair, and I'm just going to kind of do a quick review of each of them, and to give you a sense on how the conference works and the committees work and relate to task forces. So one of the committees I chair is the Time Temperature Committee, and it is considering proposal 17-225, 19-220, and 19-231. As Jeff pointed out earlier, there are a number of proposals that are holdovers from previous conferences. So proposal 17-225 was originally submitted by Atlantic Capes Fisheries in New Jersey. And the goal of that proposal was to exempt the offshore federal waters, ocean quahog and surf clam fisheries from compliance with the time temperature matrix in Chapter A of the Model Ordinance. And the basis for this was that there's really no historic illness data associating Vibrio or another bacteriological pathogen with illnesses. FDA kind of balked at this, and it got kicked to committee, and ultimately the result was the submitter and state regulators agreed with FDA that we should do a Vibrio study on offshore clams. And between the 2017 and the 2019 biennial meetings, samples were taken of ocean quahogs and surf clams. And then the pandemic hit, and this proposal kind of got back shelved. And we're still waiting for it to go through the system. Right now, the Lab Methods Committee needs to review the sampling data and then make a recommendation to the ISSC Executive Office and the FDA. And any resulting changes either to the proposal or a recommendation of adoption will need to go before the executive board and be adopted as an interim action if the board decides to accept. So that's a little detail here in the process, is in the off years when important proposals are being dealt with. and the committees make their recommendations. And sometimes the executive office allows an interim action. And if there is an interim measure that's adopted by the executive board, the proposal needs to go in front of the full membership at conference for approval or disapproval. So in the case of 17-225, this will not be resolved until the biennial meeting in 2025. The next proposal that the Time Temperature Committee is considering is pre-chilling of vehicles, proposal 19-220. This was submitted by regulators in Maine and New York, New York and Connecticut. And this would remove the requirement to pre-chill vehicles. And the basis for this proposal was the submitters were concerned that there was conflict with some state idling laws. They did a ton of research to that end and submitted a stack of documents for the committee to review. And more practical concerns, pre-chilled vehicles in the middle of summer, the cold air will escape and it's an unnecessary waste of gas and source of pollution. Well, FDA responded to this in committee recently. We recently had a meeting that changing this language would conflict with existing FDA regulations, 21 CFR 1908. And they also pointed out an industry concern based out of the Gulf of Mexico. So a number of southern states have come forward and said they'd like the requirement to remain in place in the model ordinance because the trucks heat up, to such a high temperature in the south, either at landing areas or transfer shellfish between dealers, that it actually kills shell stock. And so that was input from industry to the committee, and the committee made a decision to recommend no action on this proposal at the biennial meeting in 2 weeks' time. So the goal here is to kill this proposal. Another proposal, 19-231, would add a shipping critical control point for dealers. So those of you familiar with seafood HACCP, critical control points are places where a record needs to be generated that you've conformed with some sort of food safety requirement. This is a good example of a proposal whose heart was in the right place, but just isn't going to work for people. It was submitted from Colorado and Utah regulators. We do have in landlocked states that are members of the conference. They are participants, and we even had one from New Mexico who was an executive chair, Jonathan Gerhardt from New Mexico, who's still with the conference. And so the producer states have some, as much input here almost as the non-producing states have almost as much input as the producing states at the conference. And again, the heart was in the right place, and this would require an additional monitoring step prior to shipping shellfish. So a dealer would actually have to generate a record and retain it, that they ensured that the vehicle that was leaving their facility was properly pre-chilled, and would require verification, signature, and all that stuff. Well, this would be a significant deviation from how the National Shellfish Sanitation Program approaches HACCP in the model ordinance. The burden of HACCP compliance has always been on the receiver of shellfish. So whether you're receiving shellfish from a harvester or receiving shellfish from another dealer. And FDA pointed that out. And they also pointed out that this would probably be too difficult for state regulators to enforce, and it would create an additional burden on both states and industry. And so the Time Temperature Committee, which has members of industry, state regulators, FDA, and some advisors, unanimously recommended no action on the proposal. So this is another proposal that's going to go in front of Task Force 2 with a recommendation to kill it. The other committee I'm chairing is the Backflow Committee. It is about the humblest, least interesting committee in the conference. But we do have a charge to consider proposal 19-227, a proposal submitted by FDA regarding the proper use of backflow prevention devices. And so the basis for this proposal was in the course of FDA doing their peer audits for the plant and shipping program elements. So going out to state departments and agencies and auditing plant inspections. They were concerned that they were seeing misuse of backflow prevention devices, specifically hose bib type devices that you would typically buy for, $7 or $8, being installed on water lines that connected to equipment or had equipment connected further down the line. Regardless, in each case, it was a concern that the line was under constant pressure, and hose bib backflow prevention devices are not designed to handle constant pressure. And so what this would do is it would require installation of dual check valve backflow preventers or dual check valve backflow preventers with intermediate atmospheric vents for lines that are under pressure. And these are more sophisticated devices that cost a great deal more than your standard hose bib backflow device. So the committee was actually comfortable with changes. Again, there were some actual members who owned Shellfish facilities. And one industry representative, however, expressed a concern that the cost information that it was included with the proposal, and every proposal has cost information included in it. He was concerned that it wasn't up to date and requested that the committee provide more detailed information. So I worked with our FDA representative on the committee, who also happened to be a plumber in a past life, and another FDA committee advisor who came from a family of plumbers. And we did some research and put together, some cost information. And it was true; it was a significant, uptick in the cost for installation and a labor of a plumber. So we've included that in the proposal, and the expectation is that this proposal will be recommended by the committee to be adopted by Task Force 2 as amended. So that's another thing a committee can do, is amend a proposal. A task force can amend a proposal, and both bodies can make recommendations further up the line to adopt as recommended. Another proposal that's kind of interesting here was submitted by colleagues in Maryland, the Maryland Department of Public Health. This would reduce the frequency of plant inspections. So some of you, like Alex Hay, know we have a schedule that Public Health maintains conducting inspections. And if you're a shucker packer, you're getting visits 4 times a year. If you're a shell stock shipper, you're getting visits twice a year. And what this proposal is recommending is that shucker packers be reduced from a quarterly schedule to a triennial schedule, and also reduce the frequency of inspections for seasonal operations, either to twice a year or once a year, depending on the availability of staff for a state or the duration of operation for the facility. An interesting part of this proposal is it would also change the requirement to provide a report to a dealer at the time of inspection to within a reasonable time of completing the inspection. So model ordinance requires that when you conduct an inspection for the NSSP, you provide a report immediately. One of the trends that's emerged in this post-pandemic world with hybrid working like we do at the state now is that inspection reports are often provided to the facility via email. And we do that in our non-shellfish work, and it's even started to creep into our shellfish work. And I anticipate that FDA will not have a problem with that. I think this is, sort of a beneficial change for everyone. They may have some issues with the frequency of inspection, reductions that will get played out in Task Force 2. Additionally, there's several proposals being submitted by industry and regulators from Maine and Virginia concerning wet storage systems as they relate to relaying shell stock, commingling of shell stock in wet storage systems, and possibly relaxing some of the sampling requirements for wet storage systems through frequency and total coliform. Again, this is something I don't anticipate any of these proposals will be adopted as written. They'll probably foster a lot of debate in Task Force 2 and Task Force 1, and will not be adopted as written. And lastly, there's a suite of proposals from FDA and the ISSC Executive Office concerning marine biotoxins in an effort to clarify some of the biotoxin monitoring requirements that were adopted at the 2019 biennial meeting. There was a wholesale change of biotoxin monitoring plans for states, putting a lot of burden on industry, particularly in the offshore clam and quahog fishery. And these proposals clarify a few things. I expect most of these proposals will be adopted as written. FDA and ISSD do this quite a bit at the biennial meeting, submit proposals that are really almost editorial. They harmonize existing language and make things clearer for the user, whether they be state or industry members. The Federal Waters Committee was working on a proposal as well that involved marine biotoxins. I don't see it in the inventory of proposals. I expect it's going to be submitted as a late proposal by the Executive Office and FDA. But this requires harvesters in federal waters to enter into contracts with NOAA in lieu of a landing permit to ensure compliance with the model ordinance marine biotoxin requirements, and also enable enforcement in situations of non-compliance with the MO. One of the changes in 2019 is NOAA is now involved in being a regulator, and they had some difficulty trying to get a permit created for offshore harvesters, and it would take an act of Congress. And so in lieu of that, they've decided to use these contracts. It sounds a little scary, but this was actually pretty well vetted. ISSC, FDA, NOAA, and myself as a member of the committee did reach out to a number of offshore clam harvesters and dealers, both in Massachusetts and outside of Massachusetts, in Maryland, New Jersey, and other states where the fishery is based. And it seemed to have support by industry. And so if this is indeed submitted as a late proposal, I expect it'll probably be adopted as recommended, at least by Task Force 2. So that's, I guess, all I have for Task Force 2.
Thanks. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to, I don't know if you want to talk about 23-301.
Yeah, I can do it real quick if we have time. 23-301 is a proposal that both Jeff and I are co-submitters of, along with some state regulators from Delaware, Virginia, Maine, and one or two other states. And really, this proposal was born out of some dissatisfaction coming out of the Mid-Atlantic, as well as the Northeast, with state regulators and how they were treated in the pair audits by FDA concerning growing area mainly. To a lesser extent, plant sanitation. But during the pandemic, as the regional organizations of state regulators, stopped, meeting, a number of us on the East Coast start to meet informally to discuss issues and lead up to the next conference. And it really kind of became a group therapy session at some points. But, in the end, we had this discussion about the confusion concerning guidance documents, which is found in section 4 of the guide of, to control mollusk and shellfish. So it's not the model ordinance, it's in the larger document. And this informs, generally speaking, it informs industry and states how to conform with the requirements in the model ordinance. Unfortunately, as time has progressed, a lot of technical information has been dumped into that section, stuff that really you're not going to be able to comply with the model ordinance unless you do it in that prescribed manner. And it's created a lot of confusion. And there's a lot of different opinions on this from state to state. Some people feel more strongly about it than others. I'm close to the issue, but I'm kind of neutral. And, was elected to organize a subcommittee of the Northeast regulators, or East Coast regulators rather, and put together this proposal. And so what it does is it creates a definition of guidance documents, and it actually does something unusual. It goes into the Constitution and bylaws and changes the Constitution and bylaws. And that's why it's in Task Force 3. Changes the Constitution and bylaws to specifically prohibit FDA from using information and guidance as the basis for a citation on a peer audit. In interest of cooperation, the three legs of the stool, regulators, industry, and other stakeholders, and of course, FDA being a regulator agency, I reached out to FDA on this proposal to see how they felt about it. Naturally, they weren't too happy about changing the Constitution and bylaws. I also spoke to the ISSC office, and there's consensus between the submitters, ISSC and FDA, that this will probably be referred to committee and will be the impetus for maybe a larger, broader review of the model ordinance and where things are located and whether or not things need clarification. So this is a good example of a very targeted proposal that really focuses on some of these technical details of what's done at the conference, that really has potential for broader impact throughout the document and how we regulate shellfish and what FDA includes in its peer evaluations.
Thanks, Eric. Trying to take myself off mute. Yeah, I know we're running, we're getting close to our time. Task Force 3 is many fewer, as you saw before, many fewer proposals. And they're certainly interesting titles. I'm not sure if if I clicked on one of these, I did want to try to show you the if I have it linked to. No, it's not going to show you exactly. Show you what the proposal looks like and how it's tracked over time. Basically, it starts out as generally a page or two-page proposal, but then as the task force makes deliberations and changes, those get added to that proposal document. Then goes to committee, and those recommendations are added to the bottom. And if it goes on for multiple years, there are a lot of actions that have to be tracked. So it can be simple if it's just a word or two change, or if it's whole new sections that have been edited and re-edited. These can be 20 and 30 page documents to review at the end of the process. So you can see the proposals that are up there in Task Force 3. I encourage you to go to the ISSC website and pull up the task force documentation. ISSC.org. Do we have time, Jared?
It's right at 45 minutes now.
We could take some questions from any of the members if there's anything that's burning, and otherwise folks can get in touch with Jeff or Eric after the meeting. Is there anything that's folks want to bring up at this time? No. Well, I'll just make one comment. I had to come back after my computer kicked me off for 20 minutes, but I would have opened up this by saying that this is one of the core roles of this committee. When we created the Shellfish Advisory Panel, it was modeled after a committee in Maine that was really built around communicating to the public before and after the ISSC meetings. And so as we all know, I see Renee, I think of you and the potential ramifications of mooring areas that came about from the rewrite of the model ordinance. And small word changes matter, and when that stuff gets published into the model ordinance, it's a huge amount of work and can be very disruptive. So it's important to stay abreast of this. And so even though a lot of this stuff covers a huge scope of what our shellfish program does, and maybe as an individual member, you may be interested in just a narrow piece of it, it does have ramifications down the road. What gets voted on at this meeting coming up a year from now could have us all pulling our hair out. So I think we all understand that. Okay, well, why don't we move on to some of the previous agenda item that we passed over when I had to reboot my computer, and that would be the update on the bulk tagging considerations. Jared, I think you have a slide on that. So there's a very well prepared memo that's been sent to you last week, and I'll just sort of summarize it. we started out by hearing members of this committee talk about how it was important for us to try to alleviate some of the regulatory burden on harvesters by allowing bulk tagging. And what that means is instead of tagging every single container of shellfish, which in most cases is an onion bag, so to speak, there was a request to be able to put either loose shellfish into a container and just tag it, or have a bunch of untagged bags in a larger container, just to allow those harvesters the convenience and the speed of getting, off the flats and getting it into commerce. And so we were, went into it open-minded, and we took a look at it. We created a subcommittee of this group. We did some research on some of the other states, and then we reached out to the dealers, because obviously the folks on this committee who were interested in it for the most part were harvesters, and also members of the industry who were not on this committee also have reached out to us and asked us to consider this for their benefit. And, I understand there's a natural friction in the seafood industry at times between the harvesters and the dealers. I mean, that's never going to go away, but it really struck me sort of the lack of support and some of the problems that some of the dealers, expressed to us. We tried to have a meeting with many of the substantial dealers in the Commonwealth who deal in shellfish, and we had trouble getting them engaged, because I think they foresee this as a whole lot of challenge, very little benefit for them. And I think it does, as I mentioned in the memo, it does shift the balance, or it shifts the burden from the harvester to the dealer. And it was pointed out to us by Eric Hickey, and this is described on page 3 of the memo. There is a path forward, and that would be an intermediate processing plan by seafood dealers. In other words, the dealer must come up with a kind of a customized approach for how they're going to deal with this, under tagged or untagged product. And I also want to say that I was a little bit spooked by some ongoing court cases where there's a prominent dealer in Massachusetts that's been cited a couple of times for having untagged or improperly tagged shellfish on the premises, and there was even criminal charges brought against that individual. And the owner of that facility has expressed to me, how challenging it is to get good frontline help and to get that the employees to properly conform with all these very, very demanding aspects of these handling rules. And so I don't know, I guess the expression is, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I understand that those who are in favor of this on the harvesting side certainly thinks it should or would be. But in our scoping meeting, we heard a lot of how difficult it would be. Some folks saying that there was, it was too expensive to buy the insulated totes, and they were talking about using wrapped pallets, and wrapped pallets is a technical term, in the model ordinance. But what a wrapped pallet was and wasn't became the subject of debate. And so we just had a lot of concerns about whether this was going to weaken the standards for shellfish traceability, and also place a lot of burden on the inspectors of DPH and also of the Mass Environmental Police. So there's some bullets up here. Obviously, we didn't want to see some of the dealers who may not be as rigid in their operations become the favored dealers of where some of the harvesters could or would be selling that product. So anyway, those are my thoughts. In order for us to proceed with some kind of a rule change, we'd have to initiate a an amendment to our Code of Massachusetts regulations. We could try to do it on a pilot program. I don't want to, I'm not crazy about overusing that authority in terms of I guess I'd say that pilot programs are like regulations on training wheels. It's a good way to start. I just see this, not ending well. So it's my desire to kind of put this to bed and not pursue this. Having said that, in the memo, we talk about the burden on the shellfish harvesters, especially during Vibrio season, the need for icing, the need for efficient tagging. There are software programs that can help generate, tags, on the flats, electronic tags. I believe it's called Blue Trace. It sounds like a great way for the industry to evolve, and if there's costs incurred with that, I'd be interested in working with Sean and the Department of Agriculture to see if we can't get many of the growers, some resources to purchase that. So I welcome that the members of the committee to open up a discussion on this. I've kind of through the memo kind of stated our views on it. And so I'd like to hear from some of the others on the committee. Dale?
Hi, Dan. I just want to go on record as saying that I'm really disappointed that you came up with this as a final decision. Unfortunately, I just read the memo this morning. I haven't really had time to respond, to think about or respond to any of the specific bullets that you put up. But this is something that was very important to our members of the Mass Aquaculture Association. And so I'm sorry that this is where it's going to end or potentially end.
Okay. Well, we can continue the conversation. We can, if there are other means to help people to meet these time temperature issues, I'm really interested in that. Is there anyone else?
Mike DeBosto?
Yeah. I apologize that I missed the last meeting when this was discussed. I couldn't make it to that meeting. I understand the complication of doing it. I don't think it's a hurdle that really can't be met through standardization. So if oysters were received in, I don't see why it would have to be an insulated container that the oysters were transferred to a dealer, but that each harvester would have to, or the dealer would have to place the product in a segregated container that was marked with the tag. Something like potentially those stackable lobster crates that people use that fold and are reusable. The amount of waste and tags that are pulled off and thrown away seems sort of unnecessary, and the tagging seems a little bit redundant. So, if one harvester is bringing stuff and it's in a segregated container in a truck that's tagged, I don't see how that's much different than a pile of bags that are tagged, where a tag can easily come off the bag and get mixed with other tags that are all piled on the same pallet, which is what happens right now. I mean, when we deliver oysters, sometimes we'll deliver to a truck that is just stock full with bags that are stacked on pallets with ice on them. They're all in the same color bags. They do have separate tags on them, but the motion of the truck and the fact that these, bags sort of tumble all over the place, the opportunity for tags to fall off in those circumstances pretty high. They get caught on each other and they tear the bag, or, I think it's almost impossible for a dealer who's receiving by truck, maybe 30,000, 40,000 oysters in a day from separate towns, to segregate those bags and keep tags from coming off those as it is. So I think, one opportunity would be to have bulk tag to be transferred into containers that are segregated by grower. I don't see why they would need to be insulated containers, stackable, nestable boxes that, have the folding tops that they use for lobster transfer often seem like an adequate thing that could be rotated or transferred to those, and those could be tagged. I'm not really sure, but I don't think that, just having each individual dealer submit a plan is a viable thing, because it puts a burden on that. But there seems to be some way to sort of standardize, say, hey, if there's bulk tagging, every container that goes to the wholesaler dealer has to be tagged and only contain product from that harvester. Because right now it's just piles of bags on pallets. I mean, that's what happens right now. And sometimes we'll get orders for, 24 counts of oysters, that are going to go to it doesn't happen often, but they're going to get shipped. So we're bringing 10,000 oysters, maybe all in, 50 counts or something like that's a lot of bags. And they're not contained individually in the trucks. So there's potential for bags to get mixed up with other growers and other grow areas all the time in the reality of transferring. So I think there may be a better way to do it than just to sort of scrap it.
Dan, do you mind if I respond to two aspects of that? Because I think Mike brings up two important points that I.
Sure, Jared, go ahead.
So, Mike, I completely agree with your thinking here that there's probably some opportunity to standardize, to create some standardization. I think the problem with the pilot program as it was suggested and that we reviewed for this year was the broad scale application as an initial pilot program, opening up the doors for this being a, complete shift of burden to the dealer sector. I do think that perhaps a smaller scale pilot program involving a few aquaculturalists and one dealer that investigates ways to standardize this could be something that we could look into, and that could maybe develop a blueprint for future changes. So, I take your point there. And I don't necessarily think we're closing the door on this entirely, but we're closing the door on the request to adopt a broad scale pilot program for this year. If there was a refined, almost research type proposal from a few industry members and a dealer to investigate this, I think that's something we could consider moving forward. And to your point about shellfish tags coming off, we know that happens, and when that happens, it involves a smaller amount of shellfish being subject to embargo. If we're losing the traceability of larger amounts of shellfish, that increases the public health risk. That likely increases the way that MEP's going to look at the infraction. It's 100 oysters versus 1,000 oysters, 2,000 oysters. Is that increasing the likelihood that our dealers are going to be personally charged criminally for infractions, that amount of oysters are going to be embargoed? But that was some of the kind of comments we got from the dealer sector on this, was that, okay, we know some amount of tags come off product, and if 100 oysters isn't a big deal, and we might get a non-criminal citation for that, but if we're starting to deal with thousands of oysters, what are the enforcement? The enforcement risk there is huge for us. So I mean that would be my response to your kind of two overarching themes. I think one way there may be an opportunity to explore this on a more kind of research type level And also that, you know, we are cognizant of how this, you know, the how tags may come off and the enforcement challenges that raises, and that went into some of our thinking.
Jared, we've got Alex with his hands up, and then we'll go to Dale and Mike.
Thanks. Just real quickly, I want to follow Dale saying I too was surprised with the decision, Dan. I know that there was good discussion, you know, one basing on the fact of separating, you know, the wild fishery from the farm fishery was an issue, and you know, acknowledging that yes, there's definitely a burden onto the dealers, but you know, we had some lengthy discussions around this based on the fact that, you know, this is what dealers do. And you know, if there's criminal issues with one or a couple dealers, let's not make that the rule, despite the group here. That's kind of shocking to me. So I just want to basically go back on record and saying, you know, as a dealer, you know, I do support this for the aquaculture industry. You know, it does need to be vetted out, as we were kind of discussing our last meeting.
Yeah, I think we were challenged with some of the comments that every dealer situation appears to be a little bit different in terms of, you know, their infrastructure and their ability to keep lots separate. And, you know, it was becoming very boutique, and it was getting pretty complicated. So let's go to Dale. Go ahead, Dale.
I just would like to request that maybe this gets put back to the subcommittee and we have further discussions on this. Your decision was not vetted through the subcommittee when you with this memo. So I think give me a little time, or give us a little time to think about this, and then reconvene the subcommittee and see what comes of it.
Well, that's fair, Dale. But let's try to get some dealers involved with this, and we've done our best to include dealers in this panel. But it became really clear to us, even as we tried to hold a scoping meeting for dealers, that most of them didn't want any part of this, and we didn't get input from them. And so I'd like to make sure that if we're going to continue this conversation, that we have some from the dealers involved.
I agree, but at least a few dealers that I've talked to, they seem either very ambivalent or slightly leaning towards being sympathetic to the growers. So I agree. We need more input from them, but so far I didn't run into any large scale negative comments about it. Will also add that when you start thinking about including companies such as Blue Trace, I mean, now we're talking a monthly charge for their services. And so it's not just a one-off deal in terms of purchasing a printer and their app, but it's a continuing service that they provide.
Okay, Mike, and then we'll go to Seth.
Yeah, I would just say that no matter what the regulation is, there's always some risk of, you know, I wouldn't call it cross contamination because they're not necessarily contaminated, but that currently the reality of a tag coming off, if it's next to a lot of oysters, you know, what in reality, how often are those tags just sort of assumed to be in the right lot when a tag comes off and everybody's using purple onion bags rather than, you know, embargoed or whatever the word was. So, you know, it may be an opportunity to actually increase or decrease the risk if harvesters are delivering things all in, and they're being received in separate containers and kept separate that way, and the containers are tagged than what's currently happening.
Okay, and I think consistent with Dale's idea is we have one more meeting of this committee to maybe iron some of this stuff out. Seth? Go ahead, Seth. Seth, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Seth, you're not coming through. Do you want to put any comments into a chat? Jared, is something coming through from Seth?
I'm not getting anything in the chat or any audio.
Okay. All right. Why don't we, Seth, we're gonna move on, but if you work out your audio, we'll maybe give you a chance under other business to come back to this, but we'll keep you informed about any proceedings on this front. If we don't have any other hands up, then we'll move on to surf clam management update. So I don't have a formal presentation on this, but I do have an image. I think, Jared, if you could throw that up. So at the last meeting, we talked about this briefly. There is a now almost 2-decade-old challenge that we have regarding some jurisdictional issues concerning clam dredging and the Wetlands Protection Act. Back in 2007, Provincetown was the first community to enact a rule that they would essentially regulate under the Wetlands Protection Act and the Conservation Commission. They restricted, or I should say prohibited, surf clamming with hydraulic dredges, which is the most common gear type used for surf clams within their town waters. And that was challenged in a court case in 2015. An appeals decision was issued in 2017. And in essence, the end result was the courts, in the absence of any formal position from DEP, stated that both laws could be harmonized. And when I refer to the laws, I'm saying the laws pertaining to shellfish management by the state, as well as the regulation of dredging under the Wetlands Protection Act. So, we've tried to take issue with this, saying that we didn't think that that dredging necessarily should include the fishing gears, such as hydraulic dredging gears, but it is what it is. And so this is still an area of somewhat unresolved jurisdiction. Even though the courts have spoken, there hasn't been any municipalities since Provincetown attempted to do that has issued any restrictions on the use of dredges for purposes of harvesting shellfish. In other words, none of those communities, no other communities have done that since then. And last year, a vessel owner came forward and went to the town of Provincetown. She wanted to fish in this area, which is depicted on the screen, of Herring Cove Beach, which is a productive surf clam area historically. And so she was told that under the law that she should file what's called a notice of intent. And this is the same kind of notice of intent that someone would file if they wanted to affect a wetland, such as if they were to widen a channel or deepen a channel. So we took, that we received that same NOI, others in state government did as well. And we paused on this because of essentially the precedent that this would create, because DEP would have to issue an order of conditions, and that's usually in DMF's domain in terms of regulating fishing. So my agency had been working closely with the Department of Environmental Protection, for about 2.5 months on this, and we're still in some rather involved conversations about how to proceed. And Jared, if you could scroll down one page. So the Wetlands Protection Act and the regulations that DEP files has under their control does define something called nearshore areas of land under the ocean. And so I've had my staff do their best at depicting where this jurisdiction applies. And so you can see these lines that, and they're a little complicated, but it's essentially 80 feet at east of the Cape. And then Provincetown, it is, I believe, 40 feet. Off Truro in the bay, it is 50 feet. Yeah. And then Jared, if you scroll further down to the statewide map, you can see that in essence, there's a lot of water that or fishing areas that could fall under this whatever regulations or whatever legal determinations are made about whether fishing with dredges is in violation of the Wetlands Protection Act without some kind of a permit from the Concom or the local municipal Concom or DEP. I
Dan,
do want
I just wanted to jump in case anyone's looking at Nantucket Sound. That traces the contour line. The authority wouldn't extend beyond state waters, which would be the inner gray line. So while the green line traces the contour line that would apply, the jurisdictional line would actually be the state waters line.
Right. Thank you, Jared. And so when you look at the map, you can see a whole set of municipal boundaries that goes out to 3 miles. And you can see that there's many towns that would be involved or could be involved depending on the legal interpretations. And I also am working with the folks at DEP to try to explain that we have a lot of gears that are called dredges that aren't necessarily as impacting as a hydraulic surf clamp dredge. Clearly, a hydraulic surf clamp dredge is probably the most impactful gear on the sediment, but it's typically used in areas where surf clams grow, which is dynamic sand. So we believe the resource can survive that and still be sustainable and with full ecosystem function. So I don't have a lot to report today because we're working closely with DEP and with the various legal teams, not only at DEP, but at Environmental Affairs and at DMF or at Department of Fish and Game. But we're trying to find a solution so that these issues can be clarified, and also the DEP I don't believe has the staff to create a bunch of fishing experts or to have to manage this, especially at this multi-municipal level. So Lisa Rhodes is on the call. Lisa, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this, except I do appreciate your staff working with ours, and as we exchange our views and exchange information about these fisheries, I'm sure we'll come to some consensus eventually, but it's still a work in progress.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was a good overview. I want to, I don't have a whole lot to say either, but just a couple points. First, with regard to this map, I know that you put together this map because we haven't put together a map of the nearshore area jurisdiction. So we are now, I've put one of our folks in touch with one of your folks to see, if you want to make this map a little more accurate, because in its present form, it's not accurate, but given the scale, that we're looking at, it may be close to accurate.
Yeah.
So that's number one. In other words, I just wouldn't take too much from this map right here, except as a general idea of what the jurisdiction is. And second of all, just, our goals are to, find a way to protect, the resource so that it, continues to provide, robust shellfishing for many, many years into the future. But at the same time, eliminate, some of the onerous process that is, fundamental in the Wetlands Protection Act, like the town by town permitting. So, we're looking into, how that can be done, if and how it can be done.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. The reason I asked staff to do this map kind of at the last minute, so I apologize for that if it may not be perfect. I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I did want to point out to the members of the panel just how much municipal waters does fall under the Wetlands Protection Act definition of land under the ocean, especially like if you look at west of Billingsgate Shoal and Wellfleet, all that southeast corner of Cape Cod Bay is a pretty common surf clam area. That's, and also an area where there's a lot of dredging for cohogs as well. Those would be dry dredges, not the hydraulic dredges. And so, like I said, if you look at this with your eyes wide open, collectively, we see a whole lot of gears that could be that need to be sort of addressed, and a whole lot of geography in terms of places people fish. So that's really kind of the point of the map. It's not to establish any new jurisdictional lines, but just to show that this is a wide-ranging challenge. So anyway, I'll take any questions, but believe me, this is an issue that we're going to continue to work on, and we do intend to bring it forward at our late April meeting that we'll talk about at the end of today's session.
Mike Tabasco?
Dan, did you say this is still being litigated right now in the courts?
No, the litigation kind of finished with the appeals decision in 2017. And so, the case law is there. And now it's just a question of how do you interpret the case law in terms of agencies, regulations and authorities. One thing that the case law did establish was that the town of Provincetown didn't have the legal authority to ban hydraulic dredging because the statute leaves that up to DMF to do that. But so they couldn't do it as a fishing regulation, but whether or not they could mandate that a fishing vessel obtain or submit a notice of intent and get a permit from the town and DEP, that was the part that was upheld.
Right, Dan, just to clarify that, the Provincetown bylaw is, they can't, regulate under their bylaw this activity. Their jurisdiction is under the state Wetlands Protection Act rather than their municipal bylaw.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And what's kind of strange is that regulation from 2007 still resides on their books. So I kind of wish they had repealed that, but that was a different Provincetown Concom back in 2007. And the folks that I've dealt with in the last year are more looking just for information. And I don't think they have the same mindset that the Concom did in 2007. Mike, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it just, so the case law basically states that any municipality can require, Conservation Commission can require and through in order to receive permitting from Conservation Commission and DEP. That was upheld, and that was a final appeal, or is there?
Yeah, that was the appeal, and it didn't go to the Supreme Judicial Court. So the 2017 decision it's considered kind of final. It wasn't appealed to a higher court.
Okay.
Yeah. anyway, we're working on it. I wish I had a better answer, but you know, it's complicated, and we're working because, you know, there's not a lot of clear language. You know, there's not a clear language of what is a dredge. There's not a anyway, and then there's jurisdictional challenges. So anyway, all right. Well, if there's no other questions, I will move on to the next topic, which is the establishment of a subcommittee on municipal aquaculture site license transfers. This was an issue that was brought up in the Massachusetts Shellfish Initiative. There was a bill filed in the legislature in early 2019 that attempted to modify sections 57 and 58 when and I believe it was filed kind of as a placeholder, and I don't want to you know, vilify anyone. I know that the interest was to just get something as a placeholder because a legislative session had begun, and the thinking was that it could be kind of amended later, but it kind of set off a lot of anxiety among some of the local communities who many individuals felt like this was attempting to remove some of the local control that exists, where municipalities are given the authority to issue aquaculture site licenses and also approve the renewal and the transfers. And I don't want to speak for MAA, but it's my understanding that what MAA was hoping to accomplish is to create more flexibility in terms of their ability to, as if they were to say retire from the aquaculture business, to be able to issue that or transfer that permit to sort of the recipient of choice, as opposed to just giving it up to the town officials and having the town official decide whether to renew it or to transfer it. And so this issue became really pretty polarized during our whole Mass Shellfish Initiative. And so what I want to do is I want to have staff conduct some surveys of the various towns and try to get an understanding of how the various towns are accomplishing license transfers, you know, either between individuals or what their policies are about, you know, when a permit is up for renewal or someone wants to get out of the business, how they're dealing with that. And so this wouldn't necessarily, I don't want anybody, you know, to think that this is a precursor to DMF proposing through legislation any kind of a change to the home rule aspects of shellfish management. But I do think it's worthy of looking at how the different municipalities do this. Obviously, you have a town like Wellfleet, which is, I think, has the largest number of growers and probably has a well-oiled machine in terms of their deliberations on this issue. You have other towns that maybe only have a couple of growers that aren't as experienced in this. So this white paper is really going to sort of compare and contrast the various municipalities' approaches, and we think provide through this white paper maybe like a best management practices for a municipality if they want to, you know, they wouldn't be forced to, but if they wanted to see what works and what doesn't, especially for a town whose aquaculture acreage may be growing, you know, over time, and it may become more challenging. So, you know, I want to be true to the Shellfish Initiative's sort of call for action, you know, and this was one of them. And so I want to endeavor to do that. So I'd like to create a subcommittee and you know, have folks you know, talk this through. If we're going to create a survey, make sure we're asking the right questions. Nothing's worse than doing a survey and getting the results and not having asked the right questions, because your results can be kind of inaccurate. So we want to do that. And I thought you know, some of the members I'm proposing, at least these four, Bill Doyle, Dale Levitt, Amy, and Renee as members who would help us, kind of craft this survey, make sure we're asking the right questions. And then, we would come back to that group, and with a draft report, refine it, and then bring it to the full group. Are there any other members of the panel who would like to participate on this small subcommittee? I see Alex's hand is up.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in helping investigate this for sure.
All right. Anyone else?
This is Josh. I'd definitely be interested as well.
Okay, great.
Clarification on process though. It seems like DMF made a decision, outside what the subcommittee on bulk tagging recommended. Just want to clarify that, you'll work with us on this, not sort of come
Sure.
out with regulation that's not what
Oh,
subcommittee.
yeah, we're not going to regulate with this. We're going to present a white paper, and honestly, I've had this in my mind for many years. When the bill was filed to the legislature, I always felt it would have been much more informative if any legislator who was asked to file that bill understood what the landscape was. How do towns deal with this? What does this law require them to do? Where is the leeway? And then this is a legislative decision. It's not something DMF regulates. And getting back to the bulk tagging, I'm expressing my opinion, but I appreciate all of your participation and input, so I'm not going to close the door on that. I was just trying to point out that we thought it's more difficult than at first glance, but we are going to meet again to talk about it.
That's fair. And there is some preliminary stuff, I'll put it in the chat, that was done with the Shellfish product, the mapping tool. The Sea Grant Law Center at Roger Williams did a bunch of review of town regulations that might be helpful to start this process.
Yeah. Hey, Jared, was the EEA Assistant General Counsel involved with that? Reed?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. We have an Assistant General Counsel who used to work at that Roger Williams Center.
Yeah, Story was not Story, Reed.
Reed
Porter
Porter
was, he was.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we'll reference him as well. All right, we've got two hands up. Ron, why don't you go ahead and I'll get to you, Mike.
I would serve on that committee, but both Renee and I are from Chatham and we're familiar with the situation, both from the municipal level and also level of, so I'd probably be redundant. But it seems to me that the two, there's a lot that could be discussed, a lot of issues solved, but the two core issues are, do grants then become simply a lease from the town, or do they become a commodity in the possession of the leaseholder, which can be sold, rented, someone else for whatever the market rate goes? That's one of the issues. The other issue is, and this goes back in Chatham maybe 40 years, do the actual leaseholder have to operate? Because at one point, grants in Chatham, this goes back before me, were all passed on to what was then called Clam, and they operated all the grants, even though the lease was still the names of the issued by the town. So, no, this is an issue has to be looked into. Tough because of the addition of local control. You have year and home rule, but certainly applaud those on the committee that are going to attempt to resolve it. Hope it's some answers.
So thanks, Ron. So if you're going to yield to Renee to be on the committee and represent sort of this Chatham line of thinking, make sure that you provide your insights to her and she can kind of bring some of those forward.
Oh, that's unavoidable.
Well, we could work it that way, or I could defer to Ron. It's up to you, Dan. You have representation from a Shellfish constable on there with Amy.
Sure.
So,
I'd be comfortable with
you
Ron.
want to do it.
I'm comfortable with you or Ron. Why don't you guys decide among the two of you, and we'll and Ron, I think with your day job, or a second day job as a county commissioner, you might have some pretty good views or informed views as well. So
I sense everyone taking a step back as I wind up standing up in front, but I'm certainly willing to participate.
Okay. All right. Mike DeVasto.
Yeah, so I'm apprehensive just about the time commitment, but I think it's probably important that I volunteer to do this. I don't know how often we'll meet, and I'll do my best to make the meetings if that's all right. And I think, I appreciate this way of going about this and sort of getting an understanding of what towns are going through. And I think part of the reason why it stirred up so much in Wellfleet is because the town's an old aquaculture industry that has gone through the growing pains of sort of sorting this out in a way. And I think, does it in a very sort of fair way, which still recognizes that the resource is a shared resource. And that's managed by the municipality. So I think this is a good way of sort of getting what other towns do all on paper. And I like the idea of sort of giving, municipalities a sort of best management practices or at least a window into what other towns are doing. Because I do know that there are growers that struggle with this issue that don't have any transferability or any real sort of means to continue their business or pass it on to family or anything like that. So hopefully I can provide some insight. I'm apprehensive because I serve on the select board and my time constraints are pretty limited, but yeah, so it's up to you.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll sign you up. Okay. Anyone else? Not seeing anything else. I think we're on to other business. Right, Jared? So under other business, we'll take panel member comments and then we'll go to a public opportunity among the attendees. Are there any? Go ahead, Renee.
Hi, I just wanted to give the panel an update because I know we discussed at one of our last meetings about professionalizing the certification process for constables. So the MSOA had established a subcommittee, which was myself and Dave DeCanto and Henry Lynn, and we've met a few times. And I just wanted to advise the panel that we've started the conversation. We have a goal at hand. And primarily we looked at what the Harbor Masters Association did and what Animal Control Association did by creating an educational council. So we're looking at that. It's already been established. They've gone through the process. It's not a short-term process. It took a Harbor Masters 7 years to go through this, to professionalize their certification process. So that's what we're looking at. And so we see this as first a challenge of amending our language in chapter 130, and then also developing CMRs to implement that statute. And so all of that is a hurdle for most of us who just deal with shellfish management. So we will hopefully in the near future be reaching out to DMF to help to start joining in on our conversation to see how that process is going to develop, and hopefully establish something very similar to what the Harbor Masters Training Council has, so that we really professionalize this whole process.
Great. Thanks, Renee. Sean Bowen.
I apologize. I had to step away for a staff meeting earlier, but one issue that I wanted to bring up was something that was discussed at the Mass Aquaculture Association meeting, which was the hatcheries and seed supply and reliability and some of the difficulties that were occurring this season. I don't know if they were occurring last season, but I think the seed supply is at the foundation of any aquaculture. And I thought this might be an appropriate forum to at least bring it up and see what the panel thought. If the panel had any ideas about where to go or what to do, I just wanted to kind of throw it out there, hoping that somebody could help discuss it and maybe discuss it as a panel. Yeah.
Hey, Sean. Yeah, no, I think that's a huge issue. It's been a lot of talk this past summer and fall. There's been a few groups I know trying to do what they can to booster hatcheries, but I know this season was kind of a confluence of mitigating factors that were some out of control of hatcheries because all the hatcheries saw a lot of the same issues. But in general, I would, I don't know if there's something that can be done on a, not necessarily a regulatory level, but some sort of awareness out there that, preferably in the resource department to tap into some sort of safeguards to shore up these hatcheries so we don't run into this problem. I mean, we're going to see this effect, starting end of next year and the year after, we're going to see the big issue of not having this seed. We haven't even seen the results of that yet. So a totally on support of some sort of action and paying attention to this issue.
Alex, question, does money solve this?
I think it certainly helps. There's an issue with some of these hatcheries that just don't have enough resource.
Hey, hold on a second. Hey, Jeff, can you mute? Your computer's making some noise. Go ahead. All right. Go back.
Yeah,
Alex.
long and the short answer, yes, I think it can. I mean, there are some environmental factors, like I was mentioning, that are tough, but to overcome. But I think that it's such an underfunded piece of the industry that resources are limited. So there's not enough, for example, research done to overcome some of these issues. Some of the issues have to do with different upwelling sites. To be able to for example, the south side and the north side of Cape Cod, if there are different tides coming in that are algae blooms that are affecting upwelling issue here and there. So but yes, absolutely, money would help for sure.
Okay. Steve Kirk, and then to Dale.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in this topic as well. I think, in following Sean's comment that this is like a critical issue that impacts industry writ large. I think NRAC is funding some research. Marta Gomez down at URI, I think, is the lead, and I'm scheduled to talk to her about that. So there's a little bit of, interest and a little bit of scratching around the edges. This all was a good lead into my comment. Dan, I've been appreciative of how you taking some of the strategic planning exercise that was sort of facilitated through the Mass Shellfish Initiative. One of those topic areas was, sort of fully funding DMF to, in the form of FTE and capital needs. And looking back in that, I think it's one of the priorities. I'm wondering if there's room to think about that, that need now relative to this topic around hatcheries, which is just one element that, does deserve research, while other factors are coming up. FDA coming top down and, classification staff being stretched thin. With a new administration, new budget, potential for an environmental bond coming. If this is the right forum to think about what the funding needs are to address some of these.
Yeah, great questions. Let's just continue this conversation now. Dale?
Just to speak a little bit to the science and research side of it. There are a few commonalities across hatcheries, but in many instances, it's sort of unique problems at each individual hatchery, and they vary all across the board. And so it's going to be a really tough, challenging situation to remedy because it's going to require maybe some work on HABs, and I suspect Chrissy might speak to that, which may be playing a role in it, but I think there's a lot more involved with just the operations of individual hatcheries that may be contributing pretty significantly to it.
Chrissy, you want to respond?
Sure. So as I mentioned at the MAA meeting, I think HABs may have a role in some of the crashes that we've seen. But what I wanted to speak to in terms of, you know, the comment about funding and how we can help, a couple of things that we've done is acknowledging that this is an issue for industry. We've had proposals to the environmental and economic innovation grant. We've had some proposals that we've highly rated for funding to increase upweller or nursery locations, so that these nursery locations are spread out so that there's a little bit more resilience to either regional HAB situations or environmental parameters, so that, you know, not all the eggs are in one basket. So that's one way I don't think we've announced any of the funding, but we've highly rated proposals to provide funding for that exact reason. The other thing we've done is we've bent our long-term policy of not allowing seed south of New Jersey to be imported into the state. So we've consulted with the regional shellfish seed biosecurity program. And for the first time, we are allowing very small seed and larvae, but 1 millimeter in larvae, to come from Virginia. So we're sort of bending, and we're consulting with these expert panels to try to reconcile risk and reward for industry. And I know, you know, 1 millimeter seed isn't, you know, it's desired to get larger ones, but we are considering these challenges to industry and reassessing our policies, and also, you know, in terms of our funding opportunities, highly valuing that type of proposal.
Thanks. Okay, Josh, then we'll go to Bill Doyle.
Yeah, just real quick.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what's being said, and thank you, Sean, for bringing it up. But it goes beyond a hatchery issue. The hatcheries, yes, for the last several years, are having difficulties with getting the spawns to set and getting the seed out of the hatcheries. And seed that does get out to us, we're having an issue with that, where it starts to perform, it performs well, and then all of a sudden it stops growing. So that's a different, it may be a different issue. It might be all part of the same thing. After our meeting last week, I surveyed some of the people in, say, my coffee group, and the group that we talked to, we lost about 22.5% of the seed that came out of the upweller. And whereas in the past, we would have lost 0. And this has been going on beginning in 2020, from what we could tell, at least with us. Thank you.
Josh?
Yeah, certainly support continued conversation with MAA about this, but there are some projects looking at the crashes at the hatchery level. Marta's project as one, but larger picture, what we know about phytoplankton is so limited, and increasing that capacity in some way, I think, would be huge for all shellfish production in the state.
Yeah, Steve Kirk mentioned the environmental bond bill. So I think if we could get our act together and create some language, maybe we could get something in the bond bill, which is probably going to go forward sometime this year. Steve, you may know, it's usually done every 5 years, and it's usually done in like mid-year, probably after the budget. So All right, Mike DeVasto.
Yeah, I just had a question about, I don't really know anything about this, but the hatcheries, south of New Jersey or in New Jersey, are they experiencing the same issues that Cape Cod hatcheries are experiencing? Or is this, East Coast now? Or is it just in the North Atlantic, the Northeast? And I guess the other question I had was when Chrissy was talking about being able to get 1 millimeter seed from Virginia on a limited basis. Is that also hatcheries? Could they import that seed and grow that into larger, like say they lose their spawn or something like that? Can they import 1 millimeter seed up to sort of make up the difference for what they've lost? I think, all in all, we need a bigger network, and that would potentially allow them to keep testing the seed stock in the hatchery and make sure that it's disease free before going out to growers.
If the hatchery is listed on our website as an approved seed source, then yes.
Okay. Bill Doyle. Bill, you see?
I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't lower my hand.
Okay, no problem.
Does anyone know if the hatcheries are experiencing problems south of New Jersey the same way we are experiencing them up here?
Go ahead, Dale.
As I said, the hatcheries sporadically have catastrophic losses. So yes, we have seen that in Virginia hatcheries. We've seen it in New York hatcheries and in Maine hatcheries. It's sort of a fact of life with hatcheries that they have issues. And as I said, a lot of them are unique to each individual hatchery. But there has been some concern that there have been multiple hatcheries having similar problems in any given year. So people are sort of trying to look at that, but it's a real tough nut to crack. I mean, to try to coordinate sampling and studying at 5 different hatcheries in 5 different states is a real challenge.
Ron?
Yeah, I'm listening to this conversation. I know there was a problem with the local hatchery and some people didn't get their seed until the fall when it was promised in the spring. All I can say is we have tremendous resources here in Massachusetts, anywhere from DMF to MIT. And this seems to call for some kind of comprehensive look at how various effects of, let's say, climate change, of water temperature, ability of biological reasons for this. I mean, we could go along and say, well, the luck of the draw each year, but I think that it may go beyond the scope of right here, but that we should have a more comprehensive look as to how these shellfish hatcheries operate, what affects their production. Because, like I say, we have some resources here back on and tap into.
You're muted, Dan.
Why don't we add this to the next meeting, which we're proposing for, maybe Jared, you want to bring up that slide? We're proposing that for, I think, April 27th, 25th. And we have a draft agenda and we just wanted to get your input on other issues. Jared, are you able to bring that slide up? There you go. It sounds like we want to add further conversations about belt tagging to that agenda. Capture one about this issue, the address reduce hatchery production. So from the top, Jeff will come back along with Eric and talk about what happened at ISSC. We would do the review of the VP control plan. I believe, Chrissy, you've got some meetings scheduled for the industry? Would those be in early May?
Likely in April. So the VP control season starts in mid-May, so I'd like to have mid to late April go out and have our meetings, our training sessions, and I think we would follow the same approach as last year. We would have one Zoom meeting, one in the Cape area and one in the Duxbury Plymouth area in person.
Okay. I'll present on any developments working with DEP on the issue of the jurisdictional questions on shellfish dredging. Jared, what have you got to hear about DMF shellfish regs?
Sure. So we're probably going to do a periodic review of our shellfish regulations. There's a number of more housekeeping issues that we want to deal with, including moving the moderately contaminated shellfish regulations from section 10 into section 16, and maybe doing some cleanup of section 16. So that's probably something that we'll discuss with the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission at an upcoming business meeting of theirs, since they're our regulatory oversight body, as well as with the Shellfish Advisory Panel, just more generally describe what these housekeeping type changes are.
Okay. Amy, did you have your hand up to talk about this issue?
I don't have my hand up to talk about this issue, but a separate issue that I would like to be able to share my screen for, and that I will likely bleed into public comment, as I have some of my growers and my harbor master also here.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that's our first proposed agenda for next meeting at the end of April. If anyone wants to reach out to us in the interim and add anything, we'd be happy to do that. So we'll go to you, Amy.
Amy, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Can everyone see my lovely PowerPoint? Okay.
Yes.
So it's not letting me go to. Yeah, so I guess we'll just do it this way because I can't get to the spot where it allows me to do a slideshow. So probably 7 years ago at this point, under previous aquaculture specialist Devin Harrington and DMF staffer Christopher Scalacci, we were given verbal permission to, during very busy days in the summer, have our growers who were landing to conduct transactions during Vibrio season at Blish State Boat Ramp travel down the street, Millway, to what we affectionately or less affectionately refer to as the Grassy Knoll, which is a parking area of Barnstable Harbor Marina owned by the town. So this is just a picture of the Blish State Boat Ramp. You have here a public beach. You have the Whale Watch. You have the Matakees restaurant, and then you have the Millway boat ramp, which is very small. And then a very short drive down the road from there, you have Barnstable Harbor Marina. This is the town-owned property, and this is where they would drive to conduct their transactions. Last year, because we were audited by FDA doing their Vibrio peers, we were informed that we were out of compliance with various DPH and DMF regulations, and that activity was no longer allowed to be conducted, which put significant constraints on my growers. For those of you who may not know, there are exactly 2 places for people to get in and out of Barnstable Harbor in my town. Well, 3 technically. Millway, which is a very small boat ramp that offers basically no parking in season. You can pay to park in the Grassy Knoll if you pay the harbor master, annually for that pass. And then there's the Blish State Boat Ramp, which is open to everybody. And then there's Scudder Lane, which is largely only accessible for those who have specialized trailers. And there are a number of wholesale dealers who don't want to drive down the ramp to the sand where they would have to meet our growers. So you can see the distance in total to drive from the Blish Grassy Knoll to the Grassy Knoll is a total of 1,711.68 feet. And the distance from Millway is around 1,264.35 feet. The concerns that were brought up was that, allowing this is out of compliance with existing DPH and DMF regulations. And so as a result, I put in for a variance request similar to what was granted to Wellfleet. At that time, some time went by, I was told by DPH that they didn't feel that a variance request was the appropriate way to approve this type of activity, and had suggested perhaps a letter of authorization from DMF, which of course they can't issue unless I'm in compliance with DPH regulations. So here I am stuck 2 months before Vibrio season with no solution. And just to give you an idea of what exactly we're looking at here, this is Blish on a busy day. You have very little room, and actually by the definition of the state boat ramp, you shouldn't have just wholesale dealers parked there. It's for trucks and trailers. And so it's actually like an inappropriate use to have a wholesale dealer waiting there for a grower to come in, which, as we know, is very time sensitive during Vibrio season. And then you have like everyone, including novice boaters, who can tie up what used to be a double wide and is now a single use boat ramp. And they can be there tying up this ramp for up to 15 minutes without it being a violation by harbor master standards. You have the people who just spill out all over everywhere in the road after whale watches, and then the public beach, which often the lot fills up very quickly. It's just an extremely congested area. And when it is a busy day, you get backups on Millway from people trying to get into Blish. It's a dead end road, so they have to kind of go around and through the state boat ramp parking area to get out, which causes traffic jams, which can, again, put my growers in these time sensitive situations in danger of being out of compliance. This below picture is admittedly a beautiful Cape Cod lawn, but our grassy knoll. It's, in my opinion, a safer and more sensitive to the time issues within Vibrio season way to conduct these transactions. And furthermore, we have security at these locations. We have cameras at Blish. One is fixed, one is point to zoom, so we can look at what is happening. We have a camera at Barnstable Harbor Marina. Again, one of those is fixed and one of those is point to zoom. And I this morning pointed to zoom over at what is, storage in the wintertime, but the grassy knoll. So, really we are very good as a town about conducting Vibrio compliance checks. My growers are extremely responsible. We had done this for 6 years with no issue before last year, and everything exploded in our faces. And I really need a solution to this problem, because it's just not feasible to continue on in the way that we had to last year.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Jared, who's our regulation specialist, if there's something that we can do under the CMRs to provide some relief for Barnstable growers in this location.
Sure. So this, I think, would require an amendment to both. It would require an amendment to DMF regulations. And our regulatory process takes about 6 to 8 months for anything to move forward. So the likelihood that we could implement anything through the normal regulatory process for this coming season is very limited. We could potentially explore the use of emergency authority here. And that would require some consultation with our legal team. I'd also be curious as to what extent it may require a regulatory change or a policy change from DPH and their ability to accommodate anything for this season.
Mike or Eric want to respond to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious as to, is this an issue where it's because the product is not iced and coming directly in within the 2-hour window? Or
No.
If-
If there's ever like that timing issue that, I mean, most of the product that comes in is iced unless they're within those 2 hours and going, directly to the wholesale dealer. This is more often an instance where like they're offloading into a wholesale dealer truck. And it's the congestiveness of the situation there that, in the interest of time sensitivity and having things move smoothly, taking those transactions down the street to an area that's empty and having the person in the boat with their product that's on ice be able to put it into the wholesale dealer truck has worked very efficiently.
I guess I don't understand why it's different from Wellfleet, because we land product by truck and trailer and drive it to our marina and offload to trucks at the marina, but that's technically not where they're landed. Now we have to have ice. We have to have ice. There's no 2 hour window issue. Like, it has to be iced when it comes off the beach. But I guess I'm having trouble understanding what the difference is.
Well, Wellfleet has a variance from DPH to do that, whereas I do not, and was not granted one.
Okay, and DPH is not willing to relook at that, I guess, sounds like.
I mean, I sent out these, initial inquiries to both DMF and DPH back in July of last year. So, given those 6 to 8 months to make a regulatory change, it certainly could have happened by now, or at least could have been like on the books and in the works. I revisited, I've emailed Eric and Chrissy back in January, like, where is this? And it's been taken, under advisement. But in terms of offering solutions for this season, I have nothing.
Hey, Amy, is this just affecting the growers, or do you have wild harvesters that you want to help as well?
We don't have a wild oyster fishery.
Okay. And how many growers do you have roughly on the north side?
On the north side, around 50.
Okay. All right.
Is it possible for DMF to reach out to DPH on this issue?
Well,
yeah, we'll do that.
DPH is on the call. So I did discuss this with our legal office a year ago. A regulation change is out of the question. That's for something this small. That would regulations take a year or two to make changes. And legal office also, I'm trying to remember the call, didn't think a variance was appropriate. It would be more of a policy rewrite or development. And that's where it stood. So a variance or a regulation is not an option for DPH. It had to be some sort of interpretation of code or regulation.
All right. Well,
that requires writing up an interpretation, presenting it to the legal office, commissioner's office for review. So.
Now, wasn't there, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there a public safety? The public safety concern could be a consideration for the policy, reconsidering the policy.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of issues, competing usage, public safety, ease of compliance with the Vibrio control plan, the demonstrated willingness and success of the town in monitoring, this activity, and demonstrating that it meets the spirit intended by the regulations. And, unfortunately in DPH case, 105 CMR 500 in the shellfish section is very specific on what kinds of transactions are acceptable. And yeah, this kind of blew up during the piers, and not just with, the state agencies, but FDA also looks at state regulation and, points out to states when they're not in conformance with their own regulations. So just to, add on a little bit to what Mike just explained, when we had the conversation with our legal department, I think the best solution available would be, to engage with the town and come up with an interpretation of that reg.
Could I just ask a question to Eric Hickey?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm just curious, what the difference is between Wellfleet's situation and Barnstable situation. if Wellfleet got a variance, what's the hang?
No, the difference is about 6 years. So legal interpretations have changed in 6 years.
All right,
Actually,
Bill,
it's about 10, actually, it's about 10 years, I think. Yeah.
Bill Doyle's got his hands up.
Thanks, Dan. I'm listening and I'm wondering, maybe the terminology isn't right, but I think the theory is. Would it be possible for marine fisheries, food protection, and the town of Wellfleet, and possibly even the growers, to get together and come up with an intermediary processing plan or an SOP that could help these people and get them through the summer and make this thing work until a final solution can be come up with. Thank you.
Yeah. Mike and Eric, is that something we could get together on, in the next days or weeks?
Yeah, certainly. We could talk about that internally. I'm curious also, Eric, I'm looking at my copy of the peer. Was this cited by FDA in the peer report? Was there a citation at all?
No, there was
No.
not. This was brought to my attention prior to the audits taking place. And at that point, I used our online tool to reach out to every single grower that I have in Barnstable Harbor, letting them know that it was brought to my attention that we've been in violation and that the activity needed to stop until I can get it straightened out.
But I think the FDA auditor visited the site. I remember hearing that, but is it in, he didn't write anything up in his peer report?
No, because at that point in time, when they came to do the audit,
okay.
those transactions were no longer taking place at that location.
Okay, so there's no external documentation by a federal regulator. That's what I'm saying.
Nope.
And even from a previous okay.
All right. So Amy, I will work with staff and with the DPH staff, and we'll get together with you, and we'll try to set something up very shortly on some brainstorming to get this done.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other comments from members of the panel before we go to the public? Don't see any. All right. Jared or Julia, can you guys manage the public list and see if anyone wants to put their hand up to comment to the group?
I'll manage the queue.
So
Miranda Wilson, you're recognized. Helen, are you there? Helen, I see you're unmuted. I think you might be having an issue with your microphone. If you want to put your question or comment into the chat.
Oh, no. Oh, no. What? Can you hear me?
I got you now.
Okay. Four comments. I've saved them up. Most recent first. Michael Moore, you may remember me when I was on the Shellfish Advisory Committee in Wellfleet. I was the first person on behalf of that committee to contact you about having a variance for the sake of public health for transfer of shellfish. And if you remember, you gave us 1 year initially. It was kind of a pilot program. And it proved to be very efficient. And what's most important, thinking about everything that Amy Croteau said, is that the enforcement and the monitoring of the transfers happen efficiently on the part of the Shellfish Department. What we're all interested in here is having it work well in terms of public health. And I suggest for this coming year, which is almost upon us in terms of Vibrio, that you give them a variance for 1 year and see how it works. Because for them to wait another year really puts the efficiency of monitoring and transfer in jeopardy. And the details that Ms. Croteau gave us are very, very clear about that. Anyway, to continue, I had just briefly, I agree with what Mike DeVasto said about this, of the tagging, batch tagging. Wellfleet and probably a number of other municipalities have smaller growers, smaller harvesters, in other words, smaller businesses, and anything that makes their compliance easier, more streamlined, never mind that the tags fall off, which they do, would be easier and safer in terms of tracking what comes from where. So I really agree with what Mike DeVasto said. Second point, I mean, the third point is about hydraulic harvesting. I heard nobody mention eelgrass and what hydraulic harvesting does to eelgrass. Dredging also doesn't, help it, but there are a whole lot of species, including scallops, that are very affected by how much eelgrass there is. So whatever conversation is had about that, discussion is had about hydraulic harvesting. And by the way, here in Wellfleet, the Shellfish Committee is looking into hydraulic harvesting, what happens. Sorry to be incorrect here. The last thing is, are the subcommittee licensed site transfer meetings going to be open meetings? Through you to Jared, I guess, or Dan?
By law, they need not be open meetings, but I don't think we've made a determination on whether or not they will be. We generally like to meet with our subcommittees in private meetings in order to have, rather frank discussions, and then report back to the broader panel, the public body, on what was discussed. But we haven't made any formal determinations on the status of these meetings yet.
Okay, and who appoints people to those committees? Is
The
that
chair?
Is that Dan?
Yes.
Okay, some of you know my, resume. I was on the Shellfish Regulatory Board for 10 years. I was on the Shellfish Advisory Committee for 9 years. I've been on three different actually, land use regulatory boards, and I have no conflict. I have never had any kind of shellfishing permit, not recreational, not commercial. And I am deeply, deeply aware in detail from the get-go about this issue of site transfer. And I have no horse in the race, and a lot of thoughts about it, particularly in light of what was brought up during this meeting. And if there was any way I could be appointed to it, I would be a good and faithful member. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Jeff Connor?
Yes, thank you for bringing me in, Jared. Good morning, Shellfish Advice. Is it still morning? Well, yes, it is.
We
but-
just entered afternoon. You're a minute
Okay.
late.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for hosting the meeting, and everybody that does hard work on this panel. A couple of things are coming to mind today on the bulk tagging. When the subcommittee is working on that, to keep in mind that there are bulk tagging operations and relocation of seed from one SGA to another, and the bulk tagging of off-site culling. And the subcommittee may take up the fact that there may be bulk tagging for, say, 1,000, 2,000, or 5,000. Make it a specific bulk tagging limit so that it's easier manageable both by the harvester and the buyer. I can tell you, for one, being a Tisbury resident, growing in V11, we've had aquaculture for 3 years now. My first year, I suffered some mortality on a small amount of seed that I got. And in the second year, I suffered 90% mortality on some seed from an in-state hatchery. And that was devastating. And Josh Rietzmus worked with me hand in hand through Roger Williams Institute to drill down and do a deep dive on what it might be. And there were no conclusive results. So that's going from bulk tagging to hatcheries and seed. But I came on primarily today to listen to what's going on in the industry, but to let the director and the panel know that we started with an acre and have put in for a second acre, gone through the select board, gone through DMF site certification, notice of intent with Concom, MEPA review, you name it, 4 town agencies, 3 state agencies. And now we're with the federal agency called U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Both of my applications, one for expansion of my existing site and an application for a new site, excuse me, in V10, which is Vineyard Haven Outer Harbor, has been sitting with DMF, excuse me again, for 10 months. It's my understanding that Army Corps of Engineers states that they have a 60-day review policy. And I'm not sure if that's from determination of completed application. And I spoke to Chrissy about this. I actually got Tom Shields to pick up the phone on another matter and had a lengthy discussion with him also. And I'm not sure if, Dan, if you know why there's a log jam at Army Corps for new site approvals from Army Corps, but I can tell you the answers I've been getting, because both of my applications were picked up by a project coordinator. Her name was Ruth Ann Bryan. She immediately had to put them back down because Army Corps of Engineers is inundated with offshore wind right now. So all of our aquaculturists in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, are suffering. I'll have you know that I have 1 million live animals coming in May and June, and I have no pasture to put them in. So it's
All right, Jeffrey,
becoming-
yeah, I'm not aware of it, but I will definitely look into it with staff.
Yeah, I've contacted the Army Corps. And I got the same rationale that they're completely inundated with offshore wind permitting review. And the person who basically was in charge of aquaculture projects was on maternity leave. So she is now back. We are now seeing some turnover. We're getting applicants send us the information that they at least got an email from Army Corps. And the way DMF has been functioning is as long as they show us proof of submission to Army Corps, we're not waiting for the final determination. So if they can show us that they have communicated and submitted their application to Army Corps, we will not hold up their propagation permit.
Yeah, so let's move on. Jeffrey, I promise we'll look into this over the next couple of days.
Also, Jeff, if I could just, Dan, if I could clarify for Jeffrey, this bulk tagging decision is only for market-bound product. This doesn't affect bulk tagging for off-site culling or bulk tagging for moving seed around. So those bulk tagging allowances are still in place.
Thank you all for your hard work. Have an amazing day.
Jared, who's next?
Tyler Hagenstein, you're recognized. Could you just introduce yourself before you begin your comments?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was just, the tide's getting low and I was just about to leave, so perfect timing. So I'm a wild harvester, I'm a lobsterman, and I'm an aquaculturalist out of Barnstable Harbor. And parking is a major issue. The infrastructure in the harbor, when you looked at those aerial pictures that Amy provided, it kind of looks like there's a lot of empty space, but the majority of that parking is for slip holders. Then you have the town ramp, which is has no parking, and then you have Blish, and Blish is a state ramp funded by commercial. I mean, sorry, it's funded by recreational fisheries. So we really don't have like a commercial fishing hub for Barnstable Harbor. And it's really amazing that such a huge percentage of the oysters and shellfish that are landed in the state come out of Blish. And for what we're able to do with the infrastructure we have is pretty remarkable, I think. So then in the back of the harbor there, against that bulkhead, there's a wooden fence that's maybe 10 feet from the bulkhead, and the crane doesn't work. So, I mean, we don't landing oysters and clams there in the back of the marina there. It's not really an option. So that grassy knoll.
Tyler, if I could interrupt, because we actually are beyond our time limit, but
Yeah.
there's no better, spokesperson for this than Amy herself. So believe me, we're going to work with her. I don't think you need to pile on. She makes a compelling case, and we'll do what we can for you.
Yeah, it's the parking issue. You got multiple restaurants to whale watch. It's a major issue.
Yeah.
And it should be addressed in a timely manner.
I agree. Okay.
And just one more thing, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, I've talked to some people from the state. I can't remember their names, but it sounds like the Blish Point ramp is going to be refurbished in the next 5 years or so. As of now, it would be nice to see some money from commercial or aquaculture funding be used. That way, in the future, maybe we can have special parking for aquaculturalists in the town. Because right now with the recreational funding, there's no way to do that. That way, like there on a lot of weekends, I have to park at the courthouse, which is like 2 miles down the road, and ride a bike back down to the marina, just jump on the boat and go to work. So, and that's,
understood.
Not ideal.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Jared?
Working on it. John M., you're recognized. You can unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself to the panel.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's John Martin. I'm a oyster grower in Barnstable Harbor, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I'm just don't think that it's even a regulation issue what Amy and everyone that I know of is asking for to sell on the grassy knoll, as they're calling it. During Vibrio season, at landing, everything has to be iced. So when we come in and pull our boat, our product is all iced and tagged according to the Vibrio plan. And I can literally look from my boat, look across and see the grassy knoll from where we are. And it's usually in a sold out parking lot. I mean, I would say 90% of the weekends are sold out. But I'm not allowed to go to that lot. I could take that load that's in my boat and iced, and I could go drive to a wholesaler. And that's legal. But I can't drive around the corner to an empty lot for some reason and have the wholesale truck meet me there. So I don't even know if it really is a regulation issue or a variance. I think that's getting a little too far away from it's literally just a spot where we're looking to offload our stuff that's already within regulation to the wholesaler.
Sure.
And again, not to beat a dead horse, but the law, it's a bit of a nightmare.
John, you are beating the dead horse, and I appreciate your comments. We will definitely work on this. I promise. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
All right, we'll just take two more. Donovan?
Donovan, you recognize? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Sure thing.
Hi, everybody. My name's Donovan. I'm the Shellfish Constable for Oak Bluffs over on Martha's Vineyard. I'm going to be real quick here, but I just wanted to bring it to the panel's attention and possibly something for a future agenda item. Is that you know, a lot of this this talk is centered around aquaculture, oysters, quahogs, which it very well should be. But I think it's important to remember that we have some other species in the state that may not be as prolific, but are still very important. To case in point, over here on the vineyard, we've had the best bay scallop season in some of the towns over here that people have seen for 10 years. And so some interest, some funding, something along the lines of making sure that these smaller kind of historical fisheries are still at the forefront of people's attention is just something that I would like to see going forward, because we do have a couple of unique fisheries that aren't everywhere, bay scallops, conch, things along those lines. And I think it's important to talk about them in the bigger picture, especially since this year we were seeing with the bay scallop season, you know, the price drop off right around the beginning of New Year's, not due to supply issues, but due to kind of the atrophying of the actual dealer system. So I think that there are some issues that relate to some of these smaller fisheries that are important to kind of keep aware of, because they are still out there and there are still people making their livelihoods. Thank you.
Okay, last one, Mark Begley.
Mark, you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Mark Begley, Beach Point Shellfish, work out in Barnstable Harbor. Dan, thank you for saying what you just said about working with Amy. I asked the same thing from Michael Moore, if we could, you know, get your commitment to work closely with Amy to make sure something happens to address this this issue that's came up last year in Barnstable Harbor with the ramp and the grassy knoll. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Okay, that wraps up the meeting for today. Everybody's good with our next meeting date. We'd like to hold that in person if we could, and we're thinking about having it here in our New Bedford office. We've studied the tide charts and we were going to go with a 4 o'clock start, which means we'd feed you all dinner if you came, and anybody who has any other issues that may not have gotten sufficient coverage, or if you want something on the agenda for the next meeting, let us know. But we have a lot of deliverables based on today's conversations, not the least of which is the grassy knoll. And I appreciate you know, the challenges there, Amy, and we'll work with you folks on it. So I guess we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Seconded.
Motion by Ron, seconded by Renee.
All right. No objections, I assume?
No.
No. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Great meeting. Great to connect again, and we'll do it one more time before the spring and summer.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good day. Thank you.
Thanks.